Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about power grid resilience. And with me I have William Pickard with the Department of Electrical and Systems Engineering at Washington University. William Pickard, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And tell me, what is the power grid and what in the world does the power grid have to do with carrying water in buckets into your house and and having air conditioning and lights and TV and radio and computers and appliances?
Well, when electricity was first sent through wires, it just lit up maybe one building or one block. And it was found that that wasn't very efficient or trustworthy, and if you had more than one source of power, and if you had interconnected regions of power, the things worked better. And this just kept on expanding until in the United States we have now 3 major grids.
And the grid is what connects all these different sources of electricity and then puts the electricity out to homes and businesses.
That's right.
Okay. And so there's 3 major sources.
Well, nowadays there's 3 major sources. There is gas turbine generation, there is coal plant generation, and there is nuclear generation.
And so that's the sources of the power for the grid, the overwhelming majority of the sources of electricity.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Now, the issue of resilience of a grid is very important. And resilience, you mentioned to me before, relates to voltage and waveform and frequency. How do these, what is resilience and how does it relate to these topics that most people just have not heard of?
Well, if you have all of these different kinds of generation going on, and you have possibilities of failure or possibilities of sudden very heavy loads or of sudden loads that just simply drop off. This causes voltage fluctuations. It causes the shift in the alternating current frequency, and that can do things like cause sensitive equipment simply to quit.
And if the sensitive equipment quit, there would be a whole lot of people who would carry the water into their houses in buckets instead of having pumps.
No. But if the load began to vary unpredictably, then you might get a brownout. And if you got a brownout, some sensitive equipment, which people were counting on in their company or wherever, might go out. And that would make the customers there very angry.
We're really dependent on electricity, aren't we?
Yes. 100 years ago, we got along without it, but we sure need it now.
Okay. Now, what happens if the grid is not, so this is what you're talking about, if the grid's not resilient, if the voltage is down or the waveform is down, there's fluctuations, and you have a brownout, and if things collapse, you have a blackout.
Yes, that's right. And in the past, you generally had coal-fired plants, and if things got a little bit dim, you told people to shovel harder.
Shovel that coal harder.
Shovel that coal.
Okay.
But that doesn't work like that. When the sun goes down, if you have solar electricity, that source of energy, that source of electricity simply quits. And if you are going to have a grid that's resilient, that can put up with sudden ups and downs, you need to have some sort of storehouses of energy which can either absorb excess electricity, or if there's a shortage of the electrical energy, give back something from your storehouse.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. You've mentioned the problem of major instability in the system. Could you give me an example of what a major instability would be? What could cause that?
A major instability, the one that caused a blackout, a small-scale blackout back east a few years ago, was a blimp was tethered by a steel cable to the ground.
Okay.
The coupling at the end of the cable came loose, and the blimp drifted away, dragging the steel cable. When it came to a nearby power line, it shorted out the power line. So back at the generating station, all of the safety switches flipped out, and vast areas were rendered without power till they caught the blimp.
Okay, and so that can really be...
And restarted things.
So instability can be caused by a lot of reasons.
Can be caused by a lot of things. If you have electricity storage, if you have backup generators, you can maybe walk your way through, but maybe you can't.
Okay, and let me ask you something else. What does it mean when you try to solve some problems like this by breaking the grid into islands? There's fragment. How do you fragmentize a grid or break it into islands?
The latest thing, if you have a smart grid, you will have whole regions which could constitute an island. And if something really bad to the, say, 750 kilovolt transmission line, if something really bad happened, you have breaker switches which could simply fragment the grid into regions where they have lesser generators, smaller generators, or you have something like the Tomsock pumped hydro facility. Tomsock is down in the Ozarks.
Oh, I've been there.
Yes.
Okay.
And in a resilient grid, you will be able to allocate resources as best seems wise. Only each island of this fragmented grid is expected to make do on its own until the major fault has been corrected.
Okay, we're going to take a break and we're going to take a look at a movie about the law of diminishing returns and why we are not going to be able to rely on coal and nuclear power and gas the way that we have historically, which brings up the need to rely on solar and wind power in the future. And we'll be back in just a few minutes.
The law of diminishing returns. It's a simple idea, but it affects us all, and like it or not, it shapes our future. How? Well, think about it. The world has never spent more on military weaponry than it does today, yet most of us feel less secure than ever. At the same time, while statistics say our economy is growing, most people are no better off than they were a decade ago, and increasing numbers are actually losing ground. These are complicated problems we usually try to explain with political and economic theories. But they're also examples of diminishing returns. In economics, the law of diminishing returns says that increasing any factor of production beyond its optimum results in declining marginal returns in output. Eventually, returns go negative, so each added increment of input actually makes us worse off. Here's a simple, intuitive way of grasping the concept. If I have a cup of espresso Before I sit down at my desk, I'll get more work done. If I have 2 cups, maybe I'll do more work, but the quality will begin to suffer. If I have 3 cups, I'll reach the point of negative returns on espresso. I'll be a wild-eyed, nervous wreck, unable to accomplish anything worthwhile. This same principle is also at work in the systems that run our world. Let's look at money. We have a debt-based money system. So if we want the monetary economy to grow, then we always need more debt. Adding new debt to the economy has a multiplying effect because each new dollar in circulation changes hands many times. So more debt is good, right? Well, unfortunately, the productivity of new debt has been falling for several decades. We're just about at the point where adding more debt doesn't help the economy at all. It just adds burden and risk. How about energy? Energy is more basic than money. It powers transportation, manufacturing, the real physical economy. But it costs energy to get energy. It takes energy to drill an oil well or to build a solar panel. When we discovered fossil fuels, we suddenly got a handle on amazingly productive energy sources. A single unit of energy invested in digging or drilling for coal, oil, or natural gas could yield 50 or 100 units of energy that could be put to work somewhere in the economy. However, we've targeted the easiest and best fossil fuels first. Extracting oil from tar sands or shale takes a lot of energy, so the amount of energy we net is declining fast. The Economist magazine recently commented that the direction of change seems clear. If the world were a giant company, its return on capital would be falling. When we look at the relationship between industrial society and our natural environment, it's absolutely clear that we're on a path of diminishing returns. Over 40 years ago, a team of scientists programmed a computer to model the likely interactions between population growth, resource depletion, and environmental pollution. The resulting business-as-usual scenario showed world industrial output starting to shrink before the middle of the 21st century. Recent studies confirm we're following that scenario closely. But why worry? Humanity always solves its problems and moves forward, right? Well, not always. Archaeologists say there were about 24 civilizations prior to our own, complex societies with cities, full-time division of labor, writing, money. But all of them, all eventually fell apart. After moving forward, they went backward. Why? Civilizations tend to use complexity to solve their problems. Think specialization, technology, bureaucracy. Historically, these societies' investments in complexity reached declining returns and finally negative returns. The environment grew polluted. Resources got used up, taxes became unbearable, social tensions flared, and armies could no longer keep barbarians at bay, much less extract further spoils from conquest. Then collapse happened. Bummer. So what does that mean for us? That we should just give up? No. But it does tell us that just doubling down on strategies that worked in the past may not be a ticket to further success in the future. Fossil fuels, debt, and societal complexity propelled us forward in the 20th century. But now, not so much. Maybe we should prepare for a future of less debt and less fossil energy. Rather than looking for somebody to blame when our investments in complexity don't bear fruit, we should change our expectations and our strategies for achieving them. Envision a world of less overall complexity. Think slower, smaller, less population, less specialization, less resource consumption, less pollution, more local, more renewable, more do-it-yourself. If we plan for that kind of future, we can optimize the transition and the outcome. If we don't, we could end up as just one more failed civilization to puzzle future archaeologists.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz, and with me I have somebody who can talk about power grid resilience. That's what we've been covering in the first part of the show. William Pickard with the Department of Electrical and Systems Engineering at Washington University.
That's right.
Now, one of the things that you've mentioned to me a lot of times is that electricity is absolutely essential for the quality of life that we have. And there is a graph that does a good job of doing that, talking about the Human Development Index.
Yes.
What does that graph show?
The Human Development Index is a measure of the quality, material quality of your life. And it shows, if you look, a whole lot of little plus signs that are scattered on the graph. And it shows that if you want a decent Human Development Index, that is a point in the upper right-hand corner of the graph, then you better have a lot of electrical energy available per year.
Or else you won't be able to watch TV, listen to the radio, use appliances, or
use appliances, or the things that are so really great. And this may not mean much to you if you've never lived without electricity, but when the Tennessee Valley Authority did rural electrification in the late 30s and the early 40s, one Sunday a farmer showed up at church and he witnessed. And he said, "Brothers and sisters, I want to tell you this. The greatest thing on earth is to have the love of God in your heart. And the next greatest thing is to have electricity in your house."
So that was even better than sliced bread.
That was much better than sliced bread.
Okay, now tell me, the problem that we're facing in the future, like the movie that we saw, Law of Diminishing Returns, is sooner or later we're not going to be able to rely on coal and gas and nuclear, and because not only will they run out, but it's just terrible for the environment and our future. But the problem with solar, as you've explained before, is that when the sun goes down, there's obviously no solar power. So what do we do about that?
You have to get more solar generation. Then you worry about building granaries for electricity.
What's a granary for electricity?
Well, it could be something like the Tom Sauk Reservoir.
Okay.
It just stores electricity.
Okay.
The graph that will be shown shows that you have a curve that starts off sort of slowly and then takes off in a straight line. That is exponential growth in the most mathematically exact description. And it means, for example, that if solar generated electricity, megawatt hours per year, keeps on increasing like this, by 2024, we're going to have more electrical energy generated than we know what to do with.
By 2024?
If it keeps on, if that trend keeps on, by 2024, we're in business.
Okay. Now,
But we're in business only if you can store the electricity during the day and then pass it back at night. And for that, you need electricity storage. And there's a graph for different kinds of a diagram for different kinds of electricity storage. The problem is, it looks like you've got a smorgasbord of choices. But if you ask, what can you get at reasonable price, dependably, right away, off the shelf when you want it, there's virtually Nothing.
So we can't get all of those. We may want sea-generated electricity or wind electricity, but we may not be able to get it.
Oh, you can get the generation. You just can't store the surplus that you generate.
And that's the essential issue. There's no point in getting wind-generated electricity if there's no way to keep it and for when you use it.
Right. There are lots of different attacks. If you have too much electricity, you can use the electricity to separate plain old water into hydrogen and oxygen. And you take the hydrogen and you can store it in a reservoir and then use it in a gas turbine. That's not very efficient use of the electricity, but at least you didn't waste it completely.
Right. Okay. And so we have a lot of different kinds of energy, but harnessing them each and storing each of them is going to be something which is going to be an extreme challenge.
I think it's going to be a major challenge, but all sorts of people are saying this breakthrough is right around the corner. And a really good rechargeable battery, Edison would have told you in 1910, was right around the corner and his company was going to make it. But that battery never quite came around the corner as was hoped.
Okay. William Pickard, we're going to take a break and look at see a couple of ads, and we will be back in just a minute. Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. We are talking about power grid resilience with William Pickard at Washington University. William Pickard, there is a chart, which is a graph which is very interesting, called Norway crude oil production, and it's brightly colored. Tell us, what does that say about the sources of energy for electricity and what the future is going to be?
Well, 50 years ago, say 60 years ago, nobody ever thought of the North Sea as being a place to drill. But they did drill, and off the coast of Norway, they hit it big. So starting in 1970, Norway became a producer. And when you drill in a new oil area, you don't hit one big pool of oil. You hit a pool of oil here and a pool of oil there and a pool of oil somewhere else. And in this illustration, you see how Norway piled many medium-sized oil pools, one on top of another, to get an enormous flush of oil, millions of barrels a day.
We just have a few seconds left, so tell me, what happened to all this oil? Is there more tomorrow than today?
No, it's used up.
And so basically all of these oils that we have from Norway and many places around the world, they're just giving out.
Yeah.
William Pickard, we're running out of time. I want to thank you very much for participating in this discussion of a very complex topic. I want to thank all the viewers for tuning in Green Time, and please tune us in same time next week.